So let me show you how I set up my drum kit. Hopefully this will have some benefits for you. I remember when I first started playing drums and I got my first drum kit, I was very excited and I set it up immediately. I knew roughly how a drum kit was set up from what I'd seen on TV. And it turns out that I set it up the wrong way round. I set it up as a left-handed drum kit, even though I'm right-handed. Didn't realise I started playing as a right-handed drummer on a left-handed kit, and of course it all went wrong. Worked out all right in the end. I'm not complaining about it, but you can save yourself a lot of hassle by understanding how a drum kit's supposed to be set up, or not supposed to, but most drummers set it up. But there are no rules. Every drummer is very, very different, and you'll find over time that your setup will change depending on what feels comfortable for you, and you should experiment with different things. For example, some drummers like their toms really, really flat and low down. Others like them really high up and angled. It's the same with the cymbals, really high up and far away, like showy stuff like this, or they like them really close. But think about it. If your drum kit is making you reach or squash to hit a part of it, then does that really make sense? You want to be stable on your stool, your feet down by your side comfortably, and you want to be able to reach all the drums and cymbals without having to lean forward or squash your arms back like this. So if you're having to reach a drum that was way back here, my elbow's coming right back, then that suggests the drum's a bit close to you. Maybe you want to consider moving it forward. And if you're having to reach over here, especially if you're having to lean forward to reach something over here, then maybe you could consider moving it closer to you. Maybe it's a bit too far away. Now, of course, you can get away with reaching and doing all this kind of stuff, but it just makes sense to me. Why do that? Why not have the drum kit set up so that everything is doing easy reach? I can reach all of the cymbals and parts of the kit without having to lean forward or to the side. So there are no rules, but there are some basic guidelines that you can follow to make sure the drum kit feels good. It isn't going to do any damage and is easier to play. So I'm going to now swap over to the bass drum foot camera. It's very exciting. And I'm going to show you how I set up my drum kit. So forgive my wobbly camera hands. It's going to be a bit wobbly, but I'll do my best. So the first thing when I'm set up a drum kit is I want to have the bass drum, the hi-hat, and the snare drum set up first, because that's the center of the drum kit. That's where the rest of the drum kit is set up from. So I have my hi-hat stand and my bass drum put down first, and you can see that the snare drum goes in the middle of the two pedals. So that there's my bass. I'm creating like a triangle between the hi-hat, the bass drum pedal, and then the stool as well. It's like a triangle, ding, 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 and the snare drum's in the middle. Sorry, I'm having to move my hand all over the place here. Ignore this other bass drum pedal for now. This belongs to this pedal. It's a double bass drum pedal. It has 2 foot pedals and 2 beaters. For the double bass drummers out there, you've got 2 options. You can have the bass drum, auxiliary bass drum pedal inside the hi-hat or outside it, as I've done here. Now I like it outside because most of the time my left foot's going to be on the hi-hat pedal. That's my bass, if you like, and I want when my fingers spend most of their time on these 2 pedals to be more comfortable. So I put my auxiliary pedal on the outside just because I use it less. So I've got my hi-hat pointing in slightly and my bass drum pointing in slightly, because when you sit down on the stool, your feet naturally bend out slightly. There's this natural angle your feet, if you sit down on the stool, go into. It's a natural position. So my pedals match that. They're sort of pointing inward slightly, which makes sense, doesn't it? And like I said, the snare drum's in the middle, and then the rest of the kit is going to go round what we've got on the floor: the hi-hat stand, the bass drum, and the snare drum. Before we go on to the rest of the kit, let's take a look at the stool, or talk about the stool, I should say. So if I sit down, hopefully you can see this. Okay, let's get round here. It's kind of flat like that. You can see that my knees are beneath the top of the snare drum, the surface I hit. I see a lot of drummers when they play. Let me try and get this with my left. It's going to look weird, but forget. Here we go. Look, when they hit the drum, I told you it was going to look weird. It's the wrong way around, isn't it? But when they hit the drum, if the snare's too low, they end up hitting their leg before the snare drum. So you want to have the snare drum raised above the legs so that you're not hitting your legs with either your hand or the stick before you're hitting the snare drum. I also have the snare drum angled towards me slightly. It's not flat and it's not angled away. If it was flat like this, then this outside edge, this ridge, will get caught or played before the center of the snare drum. If I'm coming down to hit the snare drum, I don't want to hit the rim first unless I intended to. So I have it angled towards me slightly so I can easily access the center of the snare drum, And if I want to, I can hit the edge at the same time, called a rim shot. But I'm not just hitting the edge because it's angled flat or too away from me. So the snare drum's angled slightly towards me. As far as stool height is concerned, I think your legs should be kind of parallel to the floor. This camera angle isn't doing it justice because my arm is at an angle. My legs aren't actually that angled towards the floor. But they're kind of flatter than that. That's probably a true angle there. You can see my legs are pointed downwards slightly. My hips are slightly above my knees. I find that's a really good way of sitting down in the stools. Are comfortable. My legs don't have to work too much to bring the knee up. If my knees were above my hips, then I'd have to work really hard to get them even higher. If I'm too high, then that can be uncomfortable as well. But like I say, every drum is different with the stool, but I recommend you have it around here, just off flat. That seems to make sense. And make sure the snare drum is above your knees, by about an inch or two at least. Okay, so next the hi-hat. Height of the hi-hat, very, very personal. Drummers like Dave Grohl, for example, have the hi-hat way up here. I seem to find this is a good height between the hi-hat and the snare drum, about 6 inches, maybe a foot. And that gives you plenty of space between your top right hand hitting the hi-hat and your left hand underneath the snare drum. You will inevitably have sticks hitting each other when you first start playing. Something you should just be aware of. That happens to everybody. But if you have the height difference at reasonable distance, then that should happen less. So the lower down you have the hi-hat, the harder it is to avoid the sticks hitting each other. But you shouldn't have it too high either, because that can create weird effects. Basically, my hi-hat is around the same height as the toms, but you can experiment with that yourself. I just find that's a good height. The tom-toms, they're all slightly angled towards me, and they're all slightly pointing towards me as well. So I find that the first tom needs to go in front of the snare drum. That makes sense, right? If you're sat down facing your snare drum, the next drum up right in front of you is going to be your high tom, and I like to have the crash cymbal above the high tom, and you can see it's not overlapping the high tom. It's slightly behind it, so that I'm not hitting the crash cymbal accidentally when I go to reach the high tom, but I can still reach the crash cymbal very comfortably. And you see the angle of the crash cymbal is also slightly pointed towards me. That gives me good access to the edge of the cymbal and the top of the cymbal. If it was too angled like this, then what would I be doing? I'd be hitting the center here too much. If it was too flat, then I'd be hitting the edge too much and it would crack eventually. So slightly pointing towards me, a reasonable height, not too high, makes sense to me. Medium tom goes next to the high tom, again pointing towards me slightly, angled down, so I can have easy access to the center of the drum and the rim if I wanted it. And then the floor tom is the same height as the snare drum. And that makes sense as well. If you're moving from the snare drum to the floor tom, why would you want these two drums to be different heights? It feels different. So I have it pointed towards me slightly, angled down slightly towards me, same angle as the snare drum, and they're both the same height as each other. So when you transfer from one drum to the other, it doesn't feel odd. Same with the high tom and medium tom, they're the same height as each other. So when you transfer to each other, it doesn't feel too weird. And then the ride cymbal really does depend on what kind of drum kit you have. So I've got a 4 tom setup, but we'll ignore that for now. If the medium tom wasn't here, then I would definitely have the ride cymbal in closer to the snare drum. I like my ride cymbal to be nice and close, easy access to the bell, not too high, nice and low, angled slightly towards me so I've got access to all 3 areas of the ride cymbal, the edge, the middle and the bell. And yeah, that's how I like it. But when you've got a medium tom set up, you obviously can only have the ride cymbal so close. So I've overlap the medium tom a little bit just to get it in closer, but that's about as close as I can get it when I've got a medium tom set up on the kit, and that works pretty well. That feels comfortable. Then my secondary crash cymbal, I think it's best to have it set up over this side of the drum kit, over the floor tom. So then you've got a crash cymbal to strike at the end of a drum fill if you end here, and you've got a crash cymbal by your hi-hat and snare drum over here. So both sides of the kit have a crash cymbal. That seems to make sense. If you've only got one crash cymbal, or if you've got one of these beginner kits that come with just one cymbal, which you use both with your crash and your ride, if you've just got the one cymbal, then have it where the ride cymbal is for now. If you get a secondary crash, put your second cymbal, or your first crash cymbal, then have it set up here. And if you have 2 crash cymbals, I suggest that's not really written in stone, that you have one on either side of the kit. It just makes sense. So there you go. That's the way you set up the kit. It's exactly the same for the acoustic drums. This happens to be electric kit, but it makes no difference to the way you set up and the angle the drums and cymbals. But like I said, there's no rules. You can experiment yourself. Let me just come sit back down now. And I encourage you to. You should definitely try out different angles and heights and find out what works for you. But bear in mind that it needs to make sense, right? It needs to be not too far away, not too close, not too angled, especially the cymbals, because they can get damaged if they're too flat, and you can't really strike them properly if they're angled towards you too much. You'll find that if your toms are angled too much, then you're going to get pit holes where you're hitting into the skin, and so the skins will break more or more often, depending on how hard you hit. And just bear that triangle thing in mind. I think if you get the base of your kit set up, the heart, the snare drum, the two pedals, and your stool set up in a nice position, the rest of the drum kit naturally flows round that in an order that makes sense. So there you go. That's how I set up my drum kit. Hope you have fun trying to set up yours as well. Experiment, and yeah, good luck.